Doris, you darling bus, episode number 10. G'day folks and welcome to another episode of Doris, you darling bus, a fortnightly podcast about that unsung hero of the music industry, the tour bus. I'm your host, my name is John O'Zilber. Today's guest is known by many in the music industry as somewhat of a quiet achiever. He's spent the last 35 years playing hundreds of shows a year across Australia and every corner of the globe. And he's been pointed out as an inspiration for van touring, so I was thrilled to sit down with none other than Jeff Lang and to have a chat with him about life on the road. Jeff Lang, thank you very much for joining me to have a chat about tour buses.
No problem, Jono.
So, I've been doing this podcast for about 6 months. I've done 9 episodes so far, and your name's popped up a few times, interestingly enough.
Okay.
The very first interview I did was with Jimmy Hocking, which is in episode 2 for those of you playing at home.
You've known Jimmy for a long time.
Well, it seems that way, and he said...
And I've got to say, one of the first people, even a few years later, maybe this is now the end of the 80s I might be looking at, Jeff Lang was one of the first people I ever saw do touring like owning a little tour bus, and like in America, like you would do it. Yeah. Like you would sleep, he was decked out to sleep and had little curtains and like some living facilities. You know, you could put your gear under here. And I just never thought that it was doable like that. Yeah. It sounds naive, but it just wasn't an example that anyone had ever offered, you know?
Well, I mean, decked out's probably being slightly flattering. For a while there, it was I had a 2-seat lounge just sitting in the back of. I had an old Mazda E2000 diesel van, and it had no seats in the back, so it was originally full of band gear. And then when I started doing solo touring, I had a 2-seat couch sitting in there that I would sleep on sometimes, and then sometimes even haul into the gigs and have a couple of spots where people could watch the gig from on stage, which not many people did, actually, probably for the smell. They probably went up there for a half a second and went, I'm not sitting on that. And eventually that couch got kind of swallowed up by the side of stage ambience at Woodford Folk Festival. The blues stage asked if they could use it to sort of have as sort of a backstage, side of stage hang kind of something for the artist to sit on.
Like still in the van, or
no, just we moved it out of the van and just put it next to the stage. But it was a really muddy year, and it just got completely trashed.
Right.
So that was the end of that. And then I just used to have a single mattress back there.
Yeah.
So completely decked out. if you could count sleeping on a 2-seat couch, or sleeping on a single mattress under a doona as decked out. To me, that was fully decked out.
It's pretty luxurious compared to a lot of places I've stayed.
Yeah, exactly. Compared to a lot of the accommodation I'd stay in back in those days, it was fine. I mean, I used to just, I'd play a gig and I had management at the time. This manager was an old school kind of guy, and he used to think nothing of booking, like, say, Saturday night at Alexander Headlands, and then Sunday early evening in Balmain in Sydney, and I'd be driving between the two myself. So it was basically get in the van after packing up, drive until I couldn't drive anymore, pull over somewhere, crawl into the back and sleep until daylight woke me up, and then get back and start driving again. So that was, a lot of the time it was, search for a camping spot or just, pull over by the side of the highway.
Sleep on the couch in the back.
Sleep on the couch, yeah.
Well, obviously from there you have developed quite an architectural mind about your tour vans, because a few people, like I said, have mentioned you. So from the couch in the back of the van, where'd you go?
Well, it really, that was as far as it evolved, was a single mattress. At a certain point, I just didn't want to live like that anymore. Yeah. I mean, I was basically living in my van. It was... I was doing, sort of 250 to 300 plus shows a year and driving a lot. So it was really sort of born out of, practical necessity of like I say, some of the drives were kind of horrendous and a little bit dangerous. So it just sort of was a necessity to have somewhere that you could just crash in. And, if places didn't provide accommodation, then
it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I thought nothing of just getting in the van and driving and finding a spot to park,
Yeah, sure. So, and you must have done that a lot. You were doing gigs across the country, which is a pretty common story, I think, in booking gigs, particularly pre-internet days.
Yes,
in
pre-internet
Australia.
days, so there's, no sort of email lists and things like that, and no mobile phones back in those days, in the old days. Yeah, often no posters.
Yeah.
That's another story. But so it was just doing a lot of work. It's a big country, so there's a lot of ground to cover.
Well, speaking of covering ground, reading your bio, I wrote down a list of countries you've toured extensively: the UK, Europe, Japan, India, China, South Africa, New Zealand, Canada. I know a lot of musos who have toured New Zealand, Canada, the US, Europe. The ones that really stand out to me, India, China. What's touring like there? Does it look the same as it does here?
No, it is different. I mean, well, for starters, when I went to China, I've done it a few times. There was one tour where did a fair bit of travelling around. Got into like places like Wuhan in the interior and stuff like that. And the people who booked me over there, they said, we're gonna have a tour manager with you, and we're going to experiment with going by train. And the first day was kind of a pain. I had a lot of, the equipment's kind of heavy, and I didn't really think it through. I didn't have a lot of stuff on wheels or anything. So me and Grant Comerford, the bass player who was playing with me, and the tour manager, Dostaff, we were carrying stuff down these really long platforms and going, it was without meaning to whinge too much, but there was a lot of carrying and a lot of long stretches with these really heavy cases. And at the end of that, I was like, okay, I don't like this train idea. I want to drive.
Yeah.
And they're like, the tour manager's saying the traffic's pretty crazy here, which it is. The traffic's, it's not fast moving, but it's very haphazard, and the only road rule seems to be me first, and everyone follows that rule.
Yeah, sure.
So it works out for them, but like having driven in a lot of places, I was like, I'll be fine with the city traffic. He was a bit concerned about that, but the people who were doing the tour said, no, we forbid you to drive between cities.
Wow.
I was like, why? And they said, well, look, friends of ours were driving from Shanghai up to Beijing, and they left and they were driving at dusk, and they saw something sort of going up and down on the road in front of them. Then it started getting bigger, and it was one of those huge truck tires.
Yeah.
And there was just a whole bunch of them sitting on the back of a truck.
It just rolled off.
And it it didn't have anything securing it. There was nothing holding it on. They were just sitting on the back of a tray.
Yeah.
And so a bunch of them fell off, and this tyre bounced down the road and hit the front of their car, and they rolled, and they survived, but they got totaled.
Absolutely,
and
squished by a giant tyre.
Yeah, and I said, no, we're not letting anyone tour over here on the road because it's just too dangerous.
Yeah.
And it's a similar sort of thing in India. It's very, I did one drive when we were over there. The rest of it was in internal flights. It was myself and Bobby Singh, and we were travelling out from, I think it was from Udaipur in Rajasthan out to Jodhpur. And it's not that long as far as miles. Like, I can't remember how far it is. Like maybe sort of 300 or 400 kilometres, something like that. It doesn't seem like it should be that long, but it took all day and into the night. It took so long because the roads were just so. It was just the highway that we were on was just a dirt road with potholes and just a sea of trucks. Again, no one really driving quickly, but there was just so much traffic, and the quality of the roads was so bad that it was a cool thing to do, but I was glad I wasn't actually driving.
Yeah. It's funny because my alarm bells are ringing as soon as your tour manager says we're gonna try an experiment and put you on a train.
Well, they just wanted to see if it would be workable. It ended up being workable despite my whinging on the first day.
What's the alternative if he won't let you drive and if the experiment doesn't work?
Buses, I guess. Internal flights is the other one. You can do internal flights. But I like to do it as much as possible by road. like a place like the United States is really big, and there's, you know, you could end up doing a lot of internal flights, but it just kind of feels better to drive it. You get a much better sense of how far you have to travel for starters, and of just a feel for the place, you know, at ground level. Maybe that's just because that's what I'm used to.
I think there's an element of the romantic kind of idea of road tripping through the US, for me anyway.
Yeah.
A lot of pop culture's kind of ingrained that in our brains.
It's a car country, you know. It definitely, there's something about the United States culturally that you know, in terms of pop culture, that sort of a lot of it seems to hinge or involve the automobile and the open road, and, you know, highways and gas stations and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, the whole
Route 66 kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, that's the nice thing about America is they have like a kind of charming, almost casual arrogance about their own culture. That, you know, if we want to write a song about this highway, then we'll do that, and the whole song is just about driving on this highway.
On a highway,
and it becomes really cool because they just did it. They just assumed in advance that it would be cool. You know.
It's funny because this is something I've grappled with in songwriting myself, is writing songs about towns in Australia, writing blues songs anyway, maybe not so much in the folk music world. It's not very romantic to write a song about Canberra. It's not romantic to write a song
maybe it
about.
is to people who don't live here, you know, like if you hear about Queenstown and you're from the other side of the world, it might sound like a very romantic notion. I don't know. But I saw, at the same time, though, I grew up with, you know, hearing songs by people like Paul Kelly, you know, and Don Walker, Archie Roach. You know, they were singing about Australia in a very unaffected, natural way, and it sort of, by the time I was writing songs, I guess I wasn't really self-consciously writing blues songs per se. I'm just writing songs, and it didn't really seem like something that I would question the validity of, because, say, you know, that had already was just part of the landscape growing up. Mick Thomas with Weddings, Parties, Anything was another. Matt Taylor with Chain, he had songs that had Australian. He had one called Spring Hill.
Spring Hill,
you know, so I've sort of figured, well, why couldn't you?
Yeah, cool,
But I think that's something good about the American mindset, that they just kind of go, you know, it's my neighbourhood. I'm going to write a song called Memphis, Tennessee. And, you know, well, it's got to be done well. Chuck Berry was pretty good. So he made it work. But the idea, they don't flinch at that. It's like, not only do they not flinch at it, but everyone goes, you've written a song about us, our town. Awesome. We love it. Instead of sort of going, ugh, why didn't you write about somewhere else?
Yeah, right. Well, let's talk about touring in the US. Talking about touring in Australia, the common theme is distance. And that's sort of what breeds, I guess, that necessity of putting a couch or a single mattress in the back of a van. Do you find it similar in the US?
Well, it's not as much. Canada is probably more similar in terms of the sort of the brutality of the distances that you have to travel to do shows there. Probably even more so in Canada. It's bigger and the stretches are longer, and it's like kind of if everywhere was travelling between Perth and Adelaide.
Yeah, sure.
But in the States, there's a lot more shows. So, you can end up doing long hauls and stuff like that. But really, in reality, in any town, pretty much in sort of, you know, 3/4 of the country, if you're in any town where there's a gig, if you drove in any direction down any road out of that town, you're likely to come to another place that you could do a show within, like, you know, 2 to 4 hours. And that's just this massive web of interconnected places that you can play, and this isn't just, you know, somewhere you could do a gig. There's somewhere that has a gig that has an established culture of listening to people play their own songs and stuff like that. So it's a little bit, it's not quite as necessary to just be constantly, you know, like doing massive long drives over there. But it ends up happening anyway.
See, I find it interesting because a lot of people who tour the US say that, you know, you can point in any direction, drive for a couple of hours, and you'll find an established gig where there's, you know, people that are passionate about it. And yet the culture of tour buses, which is something that's become very apparent to me in doing this podcast, is such a huge thing in the
band
US.
has a.
It seems like if you thought about it logically, that would be more of a thing here in Australia where we're spending more time on the road, longer distances.
Well, it's probably economics more than anything because, it costs money to have a bus like that.
Sure,
I know that when I was touring around in the States a lot, I wasn't in a bus like that. I used to go to a second-hand car rental place. Like they always had just bombs. It was called No Hertz, spelled like Hurts.
Yeah.
No Hertz car rental in Pennsylvania. I always used to get a second-hand Chevy Lumina and just hope it lasted the distance.
Sure.
Give it back to them in 2 months and 14,000 miles on the clock.
Yeah.
You said unlimited.
Yeah.
I took your word. So, that's how I did it. But I've done a little bit of touring with other people over there where they've got the tour bus and a driver. So, if you can afford to do that, that's fantastic because, you can kind of tightly pack in shows a little bit more that way and it's not as dangerous to do it because the driver sleeps in the sort of early evening until the end of showtime and then, so they have their kind of sleep in the, like sort of late afternoon, early evening. Then the band finishes their gig, packs, everything gets packed up. They pile into one bus, the crew piles into another and the drivers have just woken up. Yeah. Everyone else goes to bed and they wake up in a new city. And so you can kind of have, you can play, say in Florida one night and then in Atlanta, Georgia the next night. And, it's a decent sized drive, but you can kind of fit it all in without having to necessarily, you can cover more ground, I guess.
Yeah, that's it. The band's not taking turns in driving. And
all of that sort of stuff. Or indeed, how I did it, where there is no one else to take a turn driving, so you just do it yourself and just hope that you stay awake.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily advocate it. It's a bit dangerous.
We'll be right back to my chat with Jeff Lang in just a second, but in the meantime, if you're not familiar with Jeff's music, he has one hell of a back catalogue of solo and band albums, as well as collaborations with a number of musicians covering a pretty broad range of genres. Head to jefflang.com.au, that's Jeff with a J, or search for Jeff on Facebook to find out more and to check out his tour dates. He also has a Patreon page set up where you can subscribe to receive little monthly nuggets of previously unreleased recordings that he's had stashed away for decades.
It's easy to get shitty about some of that stuff when, you seem to be zigzagging and it feels like you're doing a dartboard tour where someone's just thrown a dart at the map and gone, oh, what a shame, you're down there tomorrow night, But having booked gigs and tours myself, it just doesn't always line up in a logical, straight line. It just, it just doesn't always work out that show can do the Thursday and this one that's the next logical one is on the Friday. It's often the one that's on the Friday is back in the wrong direction and then the Saturday is back the other way further. So you just have to zigzag around a bit. But that said, I did have people booked me for a while, like in the early 90s, where it was, it felt a little bit like they didn't have any regard for your, the fact that you might not survive it.
Yeah.
So, it's hard to know the thinking about it. I guess it just sort of like, oh, well, you can do it, so...
A gig's a gig.
Yeah, on with it. And I didn't worry about it so much then because, if you're in your early 20s and you just kind of, it just doesn't feel... it doesn't feel like anything's that much of a danger. But, it got to a point where, you just get physically exhausted.
Mm. Well, this is something Jimmy and I talked about in that second episode is that, again, it's, your early 20s, late teens, you're sort of a bit invincible. You don't think twice about... driving overnight even, finishing a gig and driving overnight. And
no problem.
I guess you sort of look back on it later in life, you go, oh, maybe that wasn't...
It wasn't super smart.
Best idea.
Yeah, it feels like you've cheated death perhaps a few times. There were times where I'd be driving and then I'd sort of blink and I'd be like veering across into the other side of the road. Yeah. And you go, well, if there was a truck there, then it was history.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
And that truck driver would have been scarred by... having, cleaned someone up when it wouldn't have been their fault. So, in reality, it was dangerous.
When do you come to that realisation?
Well, see, it's the thing.
Hopefully not too late, I guess.
At the time, it's, each time something like that would happen, which it wasn't too often, but there were a few times, certainly. There's like, maybe 3 or 4 times where that's, falling asleep at the wheel and waking up in time to avoid disaster, but only purely through luck.
Yeah.
That there was nothing coming the other way. That happened a few times, and each time would be, oh, okay, time to pull over. Oh, I was getting a little too tired. But then you sort of, I'd get on the phone to management and go, okay, it's getting a little bit hairy. What am I doing in 2 weeks' time? Because that was always the discussion is, what am I doing in a couple of weeks? I never knew, and then I'd get told, whatever it would be, you're playing in Ballarat, and then the next night you're in Canberra, and then the night after that you're in Taree or something, and you're like, boy, it's just pushing it a little bit hard, or even Canberra, and the next night was in Coffs Harbour, say. That'd be more realistic to what happened at the time. And you'd find out a couple of weeks in advance, and then I remember the guy used to put it to me, well, if you don't want to do it, then I'll just cancel one of them. And I'd be like, well, it's only 2 weeks away. Yeah. You're going to make a prick out of me if you just know that the person who's set that up then goes, yeah, you can do that.
Yeah.
Is not going to get on the phone to them and go, oh, I've screwed up and put my artist's life in danger with agreeing to this show or booking this show. He's going to ring up and go, I just spoke to Jeff and he's decided he doesn't want to do it. And then you look like a prick.
Yeah.
So I'd just do it.
Yeah.
So those things would happen. It really, the only thing that could have fixed it was changing management, which I did. Mm-hmm. But it took me a while to work that out.
Well, that's the thing. I guess in those sort of days like pre-internet, maybe you don't have the resources that you do now. Do you have more control over where you go and when now?
Yes. Well, and part of that as well is working with people who do actually care about that, who would never do that to you. I haven't in the what is it now, 15 years I've been working with my management now. I don't think they've once booked me a run where I've gone, that's, I didn't, but that A, I didn't know something was coming, and B, that I went, you've really put me in a dangerous spot here. Mm. I mean, I still do some big drives, a couple of tours in Canada in winter have been long distances, but they're kind of smartly, they're cleverly organised, at least with some kind of logic to them where you're going, okay, well, I've got a haul to get to this one, but I've got a day off when I get there. So it just kind of takes the pressure off. You're not under this real time squeeze. Yeah,
you've got a bit of fat to sort of,
that's what used to happen is you'd have, like, say, there's like maybe 14 hours between the end of one gig and the start of the next, and there was an 11-hour drive. Yeah. Well, okay. Mm. There's not a lot of time for relaxation involved in that, and so it gets dangerous.
Yeah. Mm. You mentioned touring with Grant Comerford before.
Yes. Very funny man and a great musician.
Yes, and you've toured a fair bit with Danny McKenna as well. I know that you've recorded a number of albums with him, and I've seen you play with him a number of times.
I've done tours with say maybe one other musician a lot, like Angus Diggs and I, a drummer. He lives in Western Australia now. He and I used to tour a lot, two-piece. Mm-hmm. And, there's all various combinations of bands that I've taken out, and, there's been tours where I've had, I think there was one where it was like 12 of us on the road. But, various combinations. It's kind of, mean and lean is kind of the easiest way to travel. Yeah. But, it's nice to have other people there to crack on with. Well,
that was going to be my next question is, do you prefer touring by yourself? Do you prefer touring with one other person, with a group?
I don't mind, actually. The differences kind of make you appreciate each of them. Mm. I mean, when you're touring on your own, there's a little bit more time to reflect, which can be good and bad. I mean, I don't feel like you kind of if I'm touring solo, I'm not making decisions on behalf of everyone. So I have certain things that I like in terms of touring overseas, like logistically. I mean, it almost makes a lie of what I said before about making things safer. But my preference is if I go to another country, like say if I fly to the UK, I always request that I land and then the next night I'm starting gigging, and that if possible I have no nights off.
Okay.
It's really down to there's a certain economic rationale behind that, where if you have nights off, you're just kind of spending money somewhere.
Yeah.
And having a family now, young family back at home, if I'm away from home and if I have too many nights off, it just feels like I should be home.
Yeah.
I'm just sort of on the other side of the planet sitting around. If you're somewhere interesting, then you're spending money, going to movies or going and seeing art galleries and stuff. And if you're somewhere boring, then you're just sitting in your hotel room. You might not be spending as much money, but you're just sort of sitting there wallowing. And if you have a dud gig, then that's the worst. If you have a dud gig and you have 3 nights off in a shithole afterwards, that starts to feel like the walls inside your head close in a bit. So if you're sort of working all the time, there's a practical sort of side to it with your performance artistry, where if you have a dud gig, well, there's no time to really ruminate on it, because you're up the next day driving and you do it again, and you can kind of lift yourself up. Two dud gigs in a row followed by a bunch of days off. That's no good.
Yeah. Especially on the other side of the world.
Yeah, and on the edge of some Arctic tundra in a Motel 6 or something.
Yeah.
Not to disparage a hotel chain, but if most of the hotels that you stay in on the road are fairly perfunctory. It's you're not on holiday. It's just there to do a job. It's just a bed in a room.
Yeah. You
just want it to be clean and bug free.
Yeah.
And dry and not too hot or cold.
But that's the magic combination, though. I don't think you can get all.
I'm not sure of it's You can. It's like clean, dry, bug free, right temperature. Pick 3.
Yeah, pick 3. So okay, that's interesting. The idea of spending time by yourself and also with other people. I like that. Sort of variety. I guess.
Yeah.
If you're touring with the same people all the time, then it's people can get the shits with each other over little things when over time. Doesn't matter, who you are. If you just, there's little quirks of character that people get narky about, and that's just a natural thing. It's like just people living with each other, and if you're touring, you're kind of in each other's pockets a lot. So it can be good to sort of have some decompression time in amongst it. But again, it's hard if you're doing a packed touring schedule. Yeah. So it's good to keep a sense of humour about things, and even if you're getting a little bit shitty with each other, if you can kind of find it funny in a way, then that's helpful. Well, that leads me to a question that I like to ask a lot of my guests. What have you learned over the years about working with other people from spending that much time in close quarters?
Well, I mean, it definitely helps to. It's almost a cliche now, I guess, but there's a musical combination. Having someone who's a great player is a great thing, but if you can't sort of get along on a personal level, then it isn't really going to work. Like you might have a real. It depends, I guess. There's bands like the Who have proven that to be not true. They don't get along really well, but they manage to channel that into the music. But it just gets harder. If you're a bigger band, you can maybe have separate tour buses, separate planes even, But if you're, at the level where a lot of us are at, where you're just sort of in a van together, then it helps to get along. So, a good sense of humour definitely helps. That's the thing that I would say I've noticed is that, people who have a good sense of humour about it and can kind of roll with the punches and find a way to find the absurdities of touring life amusing, can cope with it for longer. Yeah. And I saw that early on working with people like Phil Manning. Yeah. Phil's just, he's a great guy, great musician, but also, really has a good sense of the absurd.
Yeah.
And just finds a lot of things that you encounter. If it's not a great laugh at the time, then there's a knowledge that it will be a good laugh once you're through it.
Yeah, sure.
Once you survive it, and get away from the situation you're in, then it will be funny.
I think that's a beautiful thing, to go through a shitty situation and then at the back of it go, well, that wasn't ideal.
Yeah,
have a laugh about it,
but it can be funny
and move on. Yeah.
You got to. I think that's another thing that has maybe would be no different in life in general, not just touring life. But I think it helps to be able to laugh at yourself.
Yeah.
Just because, if there is a cosmic joke being played, then it's at your own expense. Mm-hmm. And so you may as well find it funny, So any sort of stupid things that you do or dumb decisions that you make, you just have to go, well, that's kind of funny that I did that. What an idiot.
Yeah.
Why did I say yes to that?
On the subject of cruel cosmic jokes, where is the worst place you've gotten stuck?
Gotten stuck?
Yeah.
In terms of like breaking down?
Breaking down, or when plans have just fallen apart?
Any breaking down story kind of sucks, because you're trying to get, there's never like an incredible, you're not amazingly in the black, on any of this. It's always a lot of overheads with touring, and so I remember one time when I did a trip around Australia. In 1995, like all the way around, travelling in the van. That was kind of the end, almost the end of the van. That trip, it managed to kick on for a while, but
this is the Ford.
Yeah, the Mazda E2000.
Mazda, sorry.
Yeah, that was a loud van. That was like an old diesel engine sitting under the passenger seat, just roaring at you the whole time. It was a shocker. But just listen to that thing all the way around the country. And I remember there was some around the top end and getting across back around to South Australia. It was like kind of penny pinching touring, just making just enough to kind of make it. And it's like when I get to Adelaide, I had someone who'd set up a decent week of shows. There was sort of back then there was a lot of university lunchtimes you could do. Yeah. So I think I had 8 shows in 5 days or something,
wow.
and it actually was making enough money that it was like that's the sort of best week of the whole run of however long it was, a few months, driving around the country. And then driving across I got to Whyalla, or just outside Whyalla, and the engine died. And we managed to putt into Whyalla where I had a gig that night. Mm-hmm. And then I had a mate of mine travelling with me, and I just had to leave Eddie with the van in Whyalla for it to get fixed. And I had to get a hire car and drive to Adelaide, then bring back the money that I made in Adelaide and give it all to the mechanics, because it just needed a new engine, so it was completely fucked. I'd just driven it into the ground. So that was a drag, but it wasn't really like getting stranded properly somewhere. But there was a few things like that. It just, touch wood, it seemed so far to have worked out not too horrendously, that where something went badly wrong with a vehicle and things like that, I would be in a place where someone could actually get the parts to fix it, and B, that it didn't involve having to cancel gigs or anything like that. It managed to find a way of doing it. I mean, you tend to try and find a way of getting through things, whether it's catching a bus and then catching a bus back and all of that. I mean, plenty of things like that have happened, but it hasn't been any major derailment.
It's funny you say touch wood. Because I toured for maybe 5 years, if even that. Driving around the country, I was doing maybe like 50,000 Ks a year in my old Magna. Never had an issue with it whatsoever. And then within the 6 months after I decided to stop touring, I blew like 3 tyres and snapped the fan belt and all of this sort of stuff. It just comes down to dumb luck, I think, a lot of the times. Yeah,
it sort of happens with your body as well. I remember that used to happen a lot on those years in the 90s where I was doing a lot of shows, and I mean, like maybe 40 nights off in a year. But I remember if there was any, like a week, if I had a week off, that's when I'd get really crook.
Yeah, sure.
It's almost like you were psychologically going, it's like if you get to a rest area and, like a truck stop, and you need to go to the toilet really badly, and you can just hold on just long enough to get to the toilet, and then if the toilet's like, locked or something, and it's like, don't be locked. I only had enough stamina to make it there. Yeah. It's almost like your body does that in general when you're doing that much work. It kind of goes, all right, I can get you through until April 4th, and then I'm going to crash. You're going to be like really seriously ill for 5 of your 7 days off. Sorry, but you haven't been able to afford any ill days
Yeah.
over the last 6 months, so you're just going to have them all in this week.
Yeah. I wonder about people like B.B. King and his band with stuff like this, because I watched a documentary a couple of weeks ago. They were interviewing members of his band, and I think it was his trumpet player, said that the longest run that he did with B.B. was 330-something shows in a row, nights in a row, and a lot of them were one-nighters. And I wonder about that. And you think, maybe the band members might be able to sort of be interchanged and whatnot, but you think of B.B. King, who can't have been the healthiest man.
Yeah, he's a big lad.
330-odd shows in a row.
Yeah.
The kind of toll that would take on your body, and how can you keep it up for that long?
Yeah, it's impressive,
boggles
isn't
my
it?
mind.
It's impressive. Yeah, you got to figure there's got to be a bus and a driver involved in some of that. Albert Collins, when I toured with him, he said he used to mostly would drive his own bus in the States and work on it. He'd service it himself.
Yeah. Oh, you got to have a hobby.
Yeah, that's right.
Jeff, that brings us to the lightning round. I didn't warn you about the lightning round.
Okay.
But believe it or not, there is one. Hopefully I've got my card. Oh, I do. I've got my little game show card.
Okay.
We're going to play a game of Would You Rather.
Okay.
I'm sure you've played it 1,000
There's
times
been
on the road.
many permutations of this game. The most harsh one I heard, I won't say who it was, but there was a band had a version of it called "You Must Choose."
Yep.
Which is just a little bit more. Would you rather is hypothetical more. You must choose is.
Yeah, it's more definite, isn't it?
Yeah. Maybe I won't say the hardest choice that they came up with was really disgusting and horrible.
No, we might leave that one. We'll stick with these ones that we have pre-prepared. So I'm going to ask you 5 questions. It's all touring related. So I'll give you the scenario. Everyone gets the same questions. So
okay,
you're not on your own here. So you're on tour and you're on a highway in the middle of nowhere. Would you rather be the driver or the passenger?
Driver, absolutely.
Would you rather run out of fuel or get 3 flat tires?
Run out of fuel.
Would you rather pay $4 a litre for that fuel or have to fill up every 100 kilometres?
I'll fill up every 100 clicks.
Yeah.
Depends where I'm touring. Not across the Nullarbor, I won't.
Oh, probably not. You'll probably pay close to $4 a litre across the Nullarbor anyway.
40, yeah.
Would you rather have no windows or no heating and air conditioning?
I take it doesn't include the windscreen.
Yes, absolutely it does.
Oh, you're saying just no glass in them. Okay,
Yeah.
Not like you're in a blind box.
No.
I would rather have no air conditioning and heating because I've done that and that's okay.
And finally,
I'd rather that than eat bugs.
yes, most people would, I think, but you'd be surprised. Finally, would you rather have the stereo stuck on a foreign language community radio station or an early mix of your first album?
I'd rather the former.
Yeah?
Yeah, easy choice. I used to keep this cassette collection in the glove box that I called the torture tapes.
Right.
And these were things that helped with some of those long drives where you couldn't fall asleep, but there was a very real danger of falling asleep. The torture tapes were desk tapes of performances of mine where I thought they were really bad.
Okay.
Bad sounding and trying too hard and, out of tune or just sucking.
Yeah.
And I'd keep those in there because it would work.
Yeah.
It's not like it sounds like it might be narcissistic, the idea of keeping cassettes of yourself in the glove box of the tour vehicle.
Yeah,
but it's really not. It's self-punishing because they're so bad to you, especially to yourself. It's just you cannot fall asleep. It's like getting jabbed in the brain with a poker.
That's a really good technique, actually.
It worked. It worked a lot of the time because you just going, it's recoiling in anguish at listening to this shit. That it was a way of keeping yourself awake. You just cannot fall asleep with the sound of yourself not doing a good show. loud over this poxy kind of boxy car stereo. The van stereo used to be horrendous. It was just a pair of speakers on top of the dash that aimed up at the glass.
Yeah.
So it was just this really horrible, harsh sound as well.
That's
I definitely would prefer the
that's got to be the most
foreign language
insightful-
community radio station, no problem.
That's definitely the best answer I've gotten for that one. Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule for having a chat.
No worries.
And for everyone listening, thank you very much for tuning into Doris, Your Darling Bus, and we'll see you on the next one. Hey friends, it's me again. If you're enjoying the podcast, then please be sure to find Doris Your Darling Bus on Facebook and Instagram and tell all of your friends about it so that you can at least prove that you like a podcast that isn't about murder for once. Although I'm sure some of my guests have probably thought about murdering bandmates in their tour buses. Anyway, my point is, please, if you enjoy the show, share it with your friends.